Awaken your spirit-chosen ones. There is nothing more humiliating than realizing the lie worked on everyone, except one person. That one sentence explains why an entire town can look confident on the outside and still be quietly drowning in embarrassment. Because shame doesn't arrive with sirens. It arrives when evidence walks past you smiling, living well, and minding its business. The kind of evidence you can't argue with, can't exile, and definitely can't rewrite. Here's a fact people don't like admitting. Communities don't collapse because of outsiders. They unravel when one insider breaks the pattern without permission. Sociologists have observed that when a single individual exits a shared limitation successfully, group discomfort rises sharply. Not anger, not hatred, discomfort. Because discomfort forces reflection, and reflection is expensive. It costs pride, stories, and carefully protected excuses. What makes it worse is that nothing dramatic happened. No scandals, no betrayals, no burning bridges, just progress. Clean, quiet, undeniable progress. And suddenly, the same town that once laughed together can't even make eye contact. Conversations shorten, compliments sound strained, jokes start landing a little too sharp. The kind of jokes that try to be funny, but accidentally confess insecurity. You know, the "we always knew you'd do something different" type. This is where the embarrassment lives. Not in what you said, but in what your life now implies. You didn't announce growth, you didn't demand respect, you simply became inconvenient proof. And proof has a way of embarrassing people who were hoping time would blur the facts. There's also a strange, almost comedic layer to it. The same people who once gave advice like it was free candy are now suddenly very busy, very distant, very philosophical. Everyone becomes a deep thinker when reality catches up. The town doesn't hate you. Hate requires energy. What they feel is worse, exposure fatigue. This isn't a story about success. It's a story about collective shame, quiet regret. And what happens when one person accidentally ruins a shared illusion by choosing differently? And once that illusion cracks, the laughter sounds forced, the pride feels borrowed, and the town starts realizing the embarrassment isn't passing, it's settling in. Number one, the town isn't ashamed of you. It's ashamed of what you exposed. People think embarrassment comes from being mocked or looked down on, but that's not how this kind of shame works. This shame is quieter. It shows up when someone's life accidentally exposes what others have been protecting for years. You didn't confront anyone. You didn't announce that you were different. You didn't try to prove a point. You simply lived in a way that made certain excuses collapse on their own. That's what unsettles people. Most towns survive on shared explanations. The jobs aren't good enough. The system is rigged. The timing was wrong. Everyone repeats these ideas until they start to feel like facts. Then you show up as the flaw in that story. Not because you're perfect, but because you moved differently. You stayed disciplined when others drifted. You made uncomfortable choices when others postponed theirs. And suddenly the story everyone agreed on no longer holds. That's where the embarrassment starts. Not because they envy you, but because your life quietly suggests that some limits were never external. They were internal. And no one likes finding out they've been defending the wrong enemy. It's humiliating to realize that the wall you were blaming was actually a door you never tried to open. What makes it worse is that you didn't take anything from them. You didn't block their chances. You didn't sabotage their paths. You didn't even ask for recognition. So there's nowhere to place the blame. When blame has nowhere to go, it turns inward. That inward turn is shame. You become a walking reminder of postponed effort, ignored potential, and choices made out of comfort instead of conviction. And because that reminder exists without hostility, they can't argue with it. They can't insult it without revealing insecurity. They can't dismiss it without lying to themselves. So the embarrassment lingers. It leaks into awkward smiles, forced praise, sudden distance, and quiet resentment disguised as jokes. Not because you changed, but because you made something visible that was easier to keep hidden. You didn't expose them on purpose. You exposed them by accident. An accidental truth is the hardest kind to forgive. Number 2, you became the control variable that ruined their narrative. Every place runs on a story, even if no one admits it out loud. It's the story people tell themselves to make peace with their lives. In this town, the story was simple. This is how far people go. This is how things end up. And anything beyond that is either luck, cheating, or fantasy. That story kept everyone comfortable. Then you showed up as the exception that didn't fit, and the whole thing started wobbling. You didn't break the rules loudly. You didn't storm the system or demand special treatment. You followed the basics, stayed consistent, and kept moving forward. That's what made it worse. Because when someone succeeds by doing the ordinary things with uncommon discipline, it destroys the excuse that the system alone is to blame. You became the proof that effort, patience, and self-control still count. And once that proof exists, the story can't protect people anymore. In simple terms, you turned into the comparison nobody wanted. When everyone fails together, failure feels normal. When one person succeeds without shortcuts, failure starts asking questions. And those questions don't feel fair, even though they are. The town didn't consent to that level of honesty, but your life delivered it anyway. What really hurts is that your presence forces people to adjust their explanations. They can't say, "No one makes it anymore." They have to say, "Almost no one makes it." That small change is devastating because it introduces personal responsibility, and responsibility is heavy. It means some outcomes weren't inevitable. Some were chosen through inaction. So instead of celebrating you, the town grows uneasy. Conversations become guarded. Your name comes up less, not because you failed, but because you succeeded in a way that stripped the comfort from their shared narrative. You didn't embarrass them with words, you embarrassed them with data, real life, walking, breathing data. And once a narrative is ruined, it never fully recovers. People can pretend, joke, or downplay it, but deep down they know the story has a hole in it. And you are that hole, not by trying to be different, but by proving that different was always possible. Number 3, they investigated you hoping to find dirt, and found discipline. When people feel threatened by someone quietly rising above the crowd, their first instinct is to investigate. They want proof that your success is fake, bought, or stolen. They hope to find the crack in your armor, the skeleton in the closet, the story that will make the embarrassment go away. They look for shortcuts, lies, mistakes, anything to reassure themselves that the rules still apply and their excuses still make sense. But here's the twist. What they discovered wasn't dirt, scandal, or manipulation. What they found was consistency, focus, and relentless effort. They found someone who did what they themselves promised they would do someday. They found proof that the world isn't rigged against people like them, that failure was never a law, but a choice. And that's the kind of discovery that stings far worse than exposure to an actual crime or misdeed. Discipline is invisible until it's undeniable. It doesn't scream, it doesn't boast, but it shows up in results, in calm confidence, in a life that doesn't bend under pressure. When the town looked for your flaws and found none, they weren't just disappointed, they were humiliated, because humiliation doesn't come from being proven wrong. It comes from realizing you failed, not due to luck or circumstance, but because of decisions you consciously made. And there's a subtle cruelty in that kind of shame. They can't attack you without exposing their own choices. They can't dismiss your success without admitting their own passivity. They can't laugh it off without pretending that effort wasn't always an option. Your life becomes a mirror they don't want to look into, reflecting everything they avoided, postponed, or ignored. What makes it worse is that your discipline wasn't performative. You didn't flaunt it. You didn't need to. Yet it made everything else around you suddenly look sloppy, incomplete, or half-hearted. They set out to find dirt to protect their ego, but instead they stumbled on the uncomfortable truth. The only thing standing between them and your results was their own unwillingness to commit. And nothing embarrasses people more than realizing the gap was never about luck. It was about choice. Number 4, your background didn't match their excuses, and that terrified them. People love stories that make them feel safe. They like believing that success requires a secret advantage, that the world is unfair, and that certain people are born to fail. It's comforting because it shifts responsibility away from their own choices. They can point to your past, your upbringing, your resources, and nod along thinking, that explains it. It protects their ego and keeps their excuses intact. Then reality hits differently when your background doesn't fit the story. When the town looked at your life, they expected flaws they could exploit. They expected weaknesses that would justify their own stagnation. Instead, they saw someone who didn't have a golden ticket, someone who started at the same or worse place, someone who overcame the same struggles they claim were impossible to overcome. And that realization terrifies them, because it means the limits they've blamed on the world were mostly self-imposed. The wall they thought was insurmountable turns out to have a gate they simply never tried to open. This kind of exposure is brutal. It's not a dramatic fall from grace or a public humiliation. It's quiet, creeping, undeniable truth. Every conversation, every casual mention of your achievements, every glance at your life becomes a reminder. Their excuses don't hold water. The town feels small not because you are big, but because the narrative they've been defending for years just imploded. And when a story that keeps people comfortable collapses, panic and shame quietly settle in. Worse still, this terror can't be redirected. They can't blame luck, circumstance, or privilege because your life disproves all of it. They can't dismiss your achievements as anomalies because your consistency proves otherwise. You didn't have to prove yourself loud and messy. Your very existence exposed the truth. And that's what makes it so uncomfortable to watch. It's the kind of shame that doesn't vanish with anger or denial. It lingers, creeping into conversations and thoughts, forcing them to recognize what they've avoided, that growth, opportunity, and success were never a question of luck or background. They were a question of choice, a choice they weren't willing to make. Number 5, you forced a comparison. They never consented to. People like to think they control how they are measured. But the truth is, life often forces comparisons whether you like it or not. The town never asked for a benchmark. They never wanted someone to quietly outpace them, achieve what they only talked about, or live without the drama they wrapped themselves in. Yet here you are, living in a way that naturally invites evaluation, without saying a word, without boasting, without proving a point. You became the standard they never agreed to. That kind of comparison is toxic because it strips away all the excuses people rely on. They can't pretend that success requires luck, connections, or cheating anymore because you exist as evidence that it doesn't. They wanted comfort, a world where their failures were invisible, hidden behind stories of "it's not possible" or "that could never happen to us." Instead, you made possibility unavoidable. And when possibility shows up in real life, it feels like a betrayal, even if you never intended it to be. This isn't about envy in the shallow sense. It's a deeper, more unsettling realization They have been measured by someone who never asked to be measured against. And unlike numbers on a scoreboard, this comparison carries a weight they feel in every interaction. Every choice you make, every quiet success, every calm stride forward becomes a subtle mirror. It shows them what they avoided, postponed, or ignored in their own lives. And mirrors are cruel when they reveal what people don't want to see. Because of this, the embarrassment doesn't need words. It creeps in through side glances, awkward laughter, half-hearted praise, and an unspoken tension whenever your name comes up. They didn't consent to be compared, yet comparison happened anyway, and it hit closer to home than any critique ever could. You didn't force it, you merely lived, and that's the kind of disruption that can't be explained away, defended against, or laughed off. It leaves people quietly unsettled, painfully aware of the distance between their choices and yours. And the gap isn't shrinking. It's permanent, undeniable, and all because you became the living measure they never asked to face. Number 6. The town's loudest critics are defending their younger selves. When people attack, mock, or belittle someone, it rarely comes from logic. Most of the time, it's personal, even if they don't admit it. In your case, the loudest critics weren't upset about your success itself. They were defending versions of themselves they abandoned years ago, the choices they didn't make, the risks they didn't take, the effort they refused to commit. All of it is buried under the noise of their criticism. And when someone like you steps forward, living fully, calmly, and effectively, it hits them in a place they can't laugh off. Criticism becomes a shield, a way to protect a part of themselves they can't face. They can't admit that they quit or settled, so they project blame onto you. Every snide comment, every undermining gesture, every whispered judgment is a desperate attempt to reclaim a story they wrote for themselves and now can't reconcile with reality. You didn't create their shame. You merely triggered it by existing as proof that they once had the same tools, opportunities, and potential, but chose differently. The tension this creates is subtle but unmistakable. They might smile at you in public, offer polite nods, or even try to act indifferent. Behind closed doors, though, there's a quiet reckoning. They feel exposed, embarrassed by the choices they thought no one would notice, and it's particularly brutal because this isn't something you did to them. You didn't humiliate them, sabotage them, or compete unfairly. You just moved forward unapologetically, without asking for recognition. This kind of embarrassment is heavier than mockery or rivalry. It lingers in conversations they avoid having, in compliments that sound hesitant, in casual remarks loaded with defensiveness. They are defending not just pride, but memories, hopes, and versions of themselves that they can't reconcile with who they've become. You didn't confront their younger selves, but your life forced those selves to stand up and face the choices they avoided. And nothing is more uncomfortable, more quietly humiliating, than realizing the person you were supposed to be is still watching, silently, judging, and feeling the weight of your discipline. Number 7. You didn't betray them. You outgrew the agreement. Most towns, groups, or communities operate on invisible contracts. There's an unspoken agreement that everyone stays within certain boundaries, follows the same path, and conforms to the shared limitations. People don't usually notice it until someone breaks free. You didn't betray anyone. You didn't stab anyone in the back or make secret alliances. You simply moved beyond the unspoken rules that everyone else quietly agreed to follow, and that alone feels like treachery to those left behind. The shock comes from realization. They had assumed that loyalty, proximity, or familiarity meant conformity. They believed that shared comfort zones were permanent. When you outgrew those limits, you didn't just rise, you exposed the fragility of the system they counted on. Suddenly what they considered normal or safe feels small, confining, and painfully inadequate. And the more they cling to the old rules, the more obvious your progress becomes, highlighting what they avoided, postponed, or never dared to attempt. Your growth doesn't shout. It whispers in the corners of their minds. Every choice you make, every success you quietly claim, reminds them that boundaries are optional, not inevitable. And that subtle reminder is far more humiliating than any dramatic confrontation. It exposes their comfort as fear, their caution as stagnation, and their excuses as self-imposed. What makes it even harder for them to process is that you didn't have to antagonize anyone to advance. You didn't need permission, approval, or applause. You simply stepped forward on your own terms, and that independence unsettles everyone who mistook their familiarity with influence. They feel betrayed not because of anything you did, but because your actions reveal the truth they refused to face. Their own limits were chosen, and they were unnecessary. This kind of embarrassment lingers because it isn't loud. It can't be confronted or argued away. You didn't violate them. You outgrew the quiet agreement they had all been clinging to, and the worst part for them is that outgrowing is personal, unstoppable, and undeniable. It leaves people awkward, defensive, and painfully aware that life doesn't wait for anyone to catch up. Number 8, your restraint made their chaos look intentional. People often confuse noise with action. They measure life by volume, drama, and visible effort, assuming that the louder someone is, the further they've gone. You, however, moved differently. You didn't explode, overreact, or flaunt your victories. You stayed consistent, controlled, and composed. That quiet restraint became a mirror, and in that mirror, their chaos no longer looked accidental. It looked deliberate, like a choice they had made to stay small, distracted, or comfortable in disorder. The truth is, chaos can feel natural to those living in it, a convenient excuse for why things never worked out. They tell themselves that the system is unfair, that life is unpredictable, that success is reserved for others. Then you come along, calm and unshaken, and suddenly their excuses lose credibility. Their arguments about timing, luck, or circumstances crumble because your life demonstrates that discipline, patience, and deliberate choices work, even without extraordinary talent or connections. And when ordinary effort produces extraordinary results, it makes the rest of them look less like victims of circumstance and more like architects of their own disorder. This realization is embarrassing because it can't be ignored. They can't yell at it, hide from it, or make it go away. Every time they see you handle yourself with clarity, every time your success is steady instead of explosive, every time your calm contrasts with their constant scramble, it points directly to the choices they didn't make. It's a quiet kind of shame, the kind that sits in their chest during casual conversations, that creeps into casual comparisons, and that lingers when they think no one is watching. What makes it worse is that your restraint doesn't try to teach a lesson or shame them deliberately. You simply live with focus and integrity, and that alone is powerful. Chaos can be loud, messy, and dramatic, but restraint carries a weight that commands attention without demanding it. It's subtle, undeniable, and relentless. And when the town finally notices, the same life that once seemed ordinary now exposes the full extent of their own self-imposed disorder. You didn't create their chaos, but your calm made it impossible to ignore. Number 9, they can't punish you without exposing themselves. One of the most unsettling things for people is realizing that their attempts to assert control no longer work. The town may have tried to shame, manipulate, or undermine you at some point, but your rise put them in a bind they never expected. Any action against you now carries a cost, not to you, but to them. They can't publicly attack you without revealing their own insecurity, jealousy, or lack of progress. They can't challenge your decisions without showing that they never made the same ones themselves. And that helplessness is more humiliating than any personal failure. The tension is subtle but constant. When someone tries to criticize or discredit you, they immediately risk looking small. Every word they utter becomes a reflection of what they haven't done, what they've avoided, and the limits they've accepted in their own lives. If they lash out, it's clear they are reacting out of envy or fear, not reason. If they stay silent, it's clear that you've achieved a level of independence or competence that can't be touched. Either way, the embarrassment is theirs. You become untouchable, not because of power or strategy, but because the truth of your actions forces everyone else to confront their own shortcomings. This creates a strange, quiet fear in the town. People who once believed they were safe within their social standing suddenly realize that their influence is fragile. Their ability to shape opinions, assert authority, or maintain respect hinges on the stories they tell themselves. Stories that you've now disproven simply by living differently. Every attempt to reclaim control only exposes the gap between your life and theirs, a gap they can't close without either improving themselves or lying to everyone, including themselves. What makes it even more intense is that this exposure isn't dramatic. You didn't confront them directly or flaunt your superiority. You simply became the standard they can't touch without incriminating themselves. And that is the kind of embarrassment that lingers, deep and unspoken, coloring every interaction, every glance, and every conversation. It's a quiet, relentless reminder that sometimes the most powerful position isn't about fighting. It's about being untouchable by default, leaving others to wrestle with their own shame while you move freely, unaffected. Number 10, your growth rewrote the town's hierarchy without permission. Communities and towns operate on invisible hierarchies. People like to believe that status, influence, and respect are earned through rituals, years of effort, or social maneuvering. But the truth is, these hierarchies are often fragile, maintained more by perception than reality. When you advanced quietly, steadily, and without seeking approval, you didn't just climb, you destabilized the system everyone assumed was fixed. Your growth rewrote the rules without asking for permission, and that alone makes people uncomfortable, embarrassed, and quietly panicked. The unsettling part is that you didn't need anyone's blessing. You didn't seek recognition, align with factions, or manipulate relationships. You simply did what had to be done, consistently and effectively. And the higher you went, the more obvious it became that much of the town's supposed hierarchy was built on fear, laziness, or convenience rather than skill, wisdom, or effort. People who once held influence suddenly looked smaller, not because you attacked them, but because your presence exposed the fragility of their position. This is why embarrassment is so potent in situations like this. You didn't force the change. You weren't confrontational or aggressive. You simply existed in a way that highlighted who had truly worked, who had coasted, and who had relied on collective assumptions to maintain status. Every casual success you claim, every calm decision you make, every day you continue to rise becomes a subtle reminder to the town that their hierarchy is a construct, one that can shift quietly without anyone's consent, simply because someone chose to move differently. People feel exposed because they believed rank was permanent and earned in predictable ways. Your life proves it isn't. Authority can be challenged without confrontation. Respect can be claimed without asking. And the town's discomfort comes from realizing that their position, their influence, and their pride were never as secure as they thought. You didn't have to rewrite rules loudly. Your growth did it silently, leaving everyone else scrambling to make sense of a hierarchy that no longer fits the narrative they've been defending for years. Number 11, you didn't seek validation, and that removed their leverage. One of the most powerful ways people maintain influence is by keeping others dependent on their approval. When you operate within that system, compliments, advice, and recognition are like currency. People feel important because others need them, and the cycle continues. But when you stopped seeking validation, you broke that chain entirely. Suddenly, the town realized they no longer held any sway over you, and that realization is deeply unsettling. You didn't need anyone to approve of your choices, to celebrate your wins, or to confirm your direction. You moved forward on your own terms, quietly, deliberately, and without waiting for permission. That independence strips others of their influence, leaving them exposed. People who once felt powerful because they could manipulate opinion or shape perception now find themselves irrelevant. They are still playing the same game, but the player they counted on for leverage has walked away. And that gap between who they could control and who cannot be controlled is profoundly embarrassing. What makes it worse is that your detachment wasn't performative. You weren't trying to teach anyone a lesson. You weren't flaunting self-sufficiency or making them feel small. You just lived without relying on their approval. And because you didn't need them, their usual tactics, criticism, gossip, subtle undermining, lose their effectiveness. The more they try to assert influence, the more obvious it becomes that their power over you was an illusion all along. This type of embarrassment is corrosive because it's quiet and internal. No one is shouting, yet everyone feels the tension. Conversations get awkward. Compliments become hollow. Subtle jokes carry defensiveness. The town begins to sense that the control they thought they had over social dynamics, over perception, over recognition, no longer exists. And the beauty, for you, is that none of this requires confrontation. You don't have to prove yourself, attack, or argue. Independence speaks louder than words. By simply removing yourself from their system of validation, you forced the town to confront a truth they never wanted to admit. Their leverage was never real, and they are embarrassed to realize just how powerless they truly are. Number 12. Your absence became louder than your presence ever was. There's a strange kind of power in leaving. When you were around, people might have taken your presence for granted. They saw you, interacted with you, but your calm consistency blended into the background of everyday life. You didn't need to dominate conversations or demand attention. You simply existed, steady and reliable, and that quiet presence made things feel normal. But the moment you stepped away, even in small ways, your absence hit like a spotlight on everything they had ignored. Suddenly, the town realized just how much they had relied on you without ever acknowledging it. The absence doesn't just remove your influence, it amplifies it. Every task you once handled, every energy you contributed, every stabilizing force you provided becomes visible in your silence. People start noticing the gaps, the inefficiencies, the awkward adjustments they now must make. And instead of feeling gratitude, they feel embarrassment. Because your departure exposes a truth they've been avoiding, that your presence had weight, value, and impact, and they never fully appreciated it until it was gone. What makes it even more disorienting is that you didn't need to announce your absence. There were no dramatic departures, no confrontations, no statements, just a quiet shift, and everything changed. The town feels the void like an echo, awkward, persistent, and undeniable. Your absence doesn't create resentment. It creates reflection. And reflection is uncomfortable when it reveals dependence. This kind of embarrassment is deeper than envy or criticism. It's not about competition. It's about recognition of one's own oversight. Your life, your effort, and your calm competence become more apparent in your absence than they ever were when you were there. People scramble, subtly compare, and realize they had underestimated you for years. By simply being absent, You forced the town to confront the truth they had buried under familiarity. You mattered more than they admitted, and their inability to acknowledge it publicly leaves them trapped between guilt, shame, and helpless admiration. Your silence, ironically, speaks louder than any words ever could. Number 13, you became proof that staying was a choice. Most people convince themselves that life happens to them, that circumstances dictate outcomes, and that they are trapped by timing, luck, or environment. That's comforting because it removes responsibility. It allows them to explain away stagnation without feeling guilty. Then someone like you comes along, quietly moving forward, achieving what they only dreamed about, and suddenly their narrative collapses. You became living proof that staying in one place was never a necessity. It was a choice. This revelation is more embarrassing than envy, because it isn't just about what you've accomplished. It's about what they failed to do. Every casual mention of your progress, every subtle demonstration of discipline, and every calm stride forward reminds them that they could have done the same. Their failure isn't imposed by the world, it's self-imposed. And admitting that is painful, especially when they had once justified inaction with excuses that your life now exposes as hollow. The discomfort is quiet, but relentless. They may not confront you, may not openly criticize you, and may even act indifferent, but internally they are unsettled. They feel the weight of choices not made, risks not taken, and opportunities ignored. You didn't need to lecture, boast, or prove yourself. Your mere existence, thriving where they stayed still, speaks volumes about their decisions and their avoidance of responsibility. What makes this embarrassment particularly sharp is its permanence. Unlike mistakes or failures that fade over time, the truth you embody is constant. It doesn't bend to their stories, it doesn't disappear when convenient, and it can't be rationalized away. They can try to distract themselves, mock your methods, or minimize your achievements. But deep down, they know the reality. Staying stagnant was never inevitable. It was a choice they consciously made. You didn't intend to shame anyone, and yet the clarity of your life forces them to see themselves honestly. And that is the kind of embarrassment that lingers, quiet but unshakable, reminding them daily that the life they wanted but never pursued existed all along, and that you chose differently while they remained trapped in excuses. Number 14, the shame isn't about you, it's about what they'll never become. The deepest embarrassment isn't triggered by someone else's actions, it's triggered by the reflection they cast back on us. In this case, the town's shame isn't really about you. It's about the life they could have lived, but never did. The choices they avoided, the risks they refused to take, and the potential they buried under comfort and fear. You didn't make them feel small. You simply exist as a reminder of what they will never be if they continue on the same path. This kind of shame is heavier, more persistent, and almost impossible to mask. It creeps into casual conversations, manifests in forced smiles, and taints even attempts at humor. People realize that their failure to act, their compromises, and their acceptance of mediocrity are visible, undeniable, and reflected back to them in your steady progress. And because it is unspoken, because you didn't gloat or confront them, the weight of it is internalized. It lingers, quiet but corrosive, gnawing at pride and self-perception. What makes it even more potent is the comparison they can't escape. Your life doesn't need to compete with theirs. It simply exists in a way that highlights the gap between effort and inaction, courage and comfort, potential and stagnation. Every day you continue forward without drama, without demand, without apology, You shine a light on their avoidance. They are confronted not with what you did, but with what they chose not to do. This is why embarrassment rooted in possibility is unbearable. It's existential. It forces people to confront themselves honestly, to measure their own lives against what could have been. Unlike temporary humiliation or criticism, this shame doesn't fade. It can't be defended with excuses, and it doesn't rely on gossip or judgment. It is the quiet, unavoidable truth of choices unmade, paths untaken, and potential left dormant. You didn't create their shame. You simply moved forward in a way that makes them aware of the distance between their life and the life they could have led. And that realization is far more uncomfortable than any insult, rumor, or failure ever could be. It's the kind of truth that stings silently, lingers indefinitely, and forces reflection that no one is ever fully prepared to face. The truth is simple but powerful. The embarrassment of a town, a community, or a group rarely comes from what you say or do. It comes from what you become without seeking permission, approval, or attention. You didn't create conflict. You didn't seek to shame anyone, and you didn't need to prove a point. You simply moved forward, lived with discipline, embraced your independence, and became undeniable proof that limits are often self-imposed. Comfort zones are chosen, and potential is wasted only by inaction. Every glance, every conversation, and every reflection they have now carries the weight of what they avoided seeing. And that is far more uncomfortable than anything you could say or do. From exposing excuses to breaking invisible hierarchies, from quiet restraint to living without validation, your life becomes a mirror they cannot escape. And in that mirror, they see the truth they hoped time would hide. The life they could have lived but didn't, the choices they postponed, and the courage they never summoned. This is why your presence, and even your absence, can create embarrassment so deep, so persistent, that it doesn't fade with gossip, rationalizations, or denial. It lingers quietly, shaping perceptions, shifting dynamics, and revealing truths no one can fully ignore. The key takeaway is this: power, respect, and influence are often less about what you say and more about what you do, quietly, consistently, and without demand. When you rise, thrive, and live deliberately, you force reflection, accountability, and self-examination in ways words never could. You don't need to fight, manipulate, or dominate. Your life alone becomes the evidence that exposes the cracks, dismantles excuses, and leaves others to wrestle with truths they never wanted to face. If this video gave you insight, perspective, or a new way to see your own journey, make sure you hit that subscribe button. Like this video, leave a comment sharing your thoughts, and share it with someone who needs to hear this. Every step forward you take quietly shapes the world around you. Now let's keep moving forward together. Stay blessed always.